So Karina, maybe just introduce yourself and then take it away.
Okay, I'm Karina. As Linda said, I serve with Donna on the, I told my brain, I've been up since 3, so with the, on the board, and yeah, I'm a very avid reader, and so, and I've been serving with the Education Committee, and so we decided to part of the education with the, for this, we decided to do a book club. We did a book club last year, and we read, I just said it earlier.
The Ungrateful Refugee.
Yeah, The Ungrateful Refugee, about a refugee from, I think it was Iran, who came to the States because her mom became a Christian, and when she got to, and she was getting persecuted, so she came to America and took her children with her, but her daughter still really loved her home country, and that tension of people always assuming you should be so grateful to be here, when she was like, I actually miss my culture. And so that tension of being a refugee, as well as also she went back and served in refugee camps and told other people's stories. So this is a good segue from that book, because each chapter is dedicated to a different person's story. So for those that did get to read the book, my first question for you guys is, what are your takeaways? Your first impression of the book?
Well, I'll start.
I mean, for everyone that hasn't read it, Hoopla has it online and you can get it audio. And that's the way I like to do it, because then you can hear the author. Mostly it's the author that's reading the stories of other people. Sometimes it's the person who actually had the experience. But I like to hear the voice of the author. Plus, you can do that while you're doing other things. So, word out there, go Hoopla.
Yeah, I also listened to the audiobook on Hoopla. So,
and I think that for me,
I did too.
over and over and over again, I think that again, we just really very much need to listen and try to hear the heart, because sometimes the actions and the words don't tell us what the real heart is saying. So I think that we just really need to take very much time, very, very much time, and listen carefully, because we don't know where someone has been. One of the things that jumped out to me, Karina, you're probably going to ask this question, so I'm just going to jump right in. One of the most poignant, horrifying experiences, of which there are many throughout the book, but was when in Bosnia during the war, when the main character there was alone in the apartment. Her mom had gone to work and the sirens go off, and her mom has told her, go down to the basement, and she has to go on her own down 6 flights of steps into the basement. But when she gets into the basement, it's like with water and with rats, and she has to keep kicking the rats as she's waiting and waiting for the siren to sound, and the adults that are there in the basement with her to tell her that it's okay, that the danger is over. And I just think such intense fear, and what that must do to a child's mind. And I know, having taught kids that are learning English, we're all supposed to think about why they might not have been in school, why their education is not progressed to the level that a child of that age, but to think of the fear and the horrific living conditions. Anyway, that spoke to me.
Donna, I'll piggyback on that, okay? Because wasn't that the little girl? She was age 4. Yeah. And what got me about it was that her father was Muslim, and I think I'm right. I think I have the right character. Didn't he volunteer to go to the war to save his Catholic friend? Now that spoke volumes, because these soldiers came into the workplace and conscripted her father, and I mean they conscripted the Catholic man, and the father of the little girl knew that would mean his demise. He wouldn't survive the war because he was he was of the opposite camp, I guess. I don't know, but he wouldn't survive. I don't know. They didn't say why, but so he said, I couldn't let my best friend die. So he went in his place. What a wonderful man. Oh, that was a memorable time for me.
Yeah, I think that when I was reading, or because I had the audiobook, so as I was listening through the different stories, I had to keep reminding myself the age of the characters, because the stories are so mature, and I, there's such a loss of childhood in these experiences that, it's they age and mature much faster than they're educated necessarily in school, right? Or they're dismissed from school, or they're distanced from that, sort of what Donna was saying. And there were so many times that I had to sit there, if it was about a child, and remind myself of the age. It got to the point where it was, every time they'd mention how old they were, I was like, it's 12 years old, 12 years old. 12. Like, I had to remind myself to keep it in there.
I know, but they were reflecting back, because this book was written in 2020, and she has spent the last few years. So these adults are reflecting back on so it's not like you're listening to a child's voice. It's listening to the distillation of what happened and the stories of their family, and how the real meaning, the real meaning. Anyway.
What I thought was very interesting, at the end of the book, she says how she knows all the people she interviewed. So yeah. It wasn't like she was, a professor who did research. She knew all these people were her friends. And so it gave it more the human
many
touch.
Different countries. I mean,
yeah.
Liberia, the Liberia story got to me, that guy with the malaria. Oh my gosh, what a story.
Yeah.
And it was interesting because I think, I don't know if it was in the introduction to the book, but it said Minnesota has, I think, settled more refugees than any other state. And it's in Minnesota. I lived in Minnesota for 4 years, and it's not a real ethnically diverse state. A lot of Scandinavian immigrants settled there. So I don't know what percent is white population, but it's interesting that state has taken in so many refugees from all over.
Yeah.
And they have more Liberians than any other state in America, more Liberian refugees than any other state, it said at the end. I thought that was interesting.
It also, I believe it said 81% of the state are Caucasian. And it also talked about, and of course, anybody watching current events. I mean, Minneapolis has had such strife with the Black communities, and it talked about that. So it's this crazy irony, sort of, that a state that its public policy has been so welcoming, I'm assuming, has so much homogeneity and problems, which they don't really, they don't really talk about that, do they, in this?
No.
It does make me wonder what the experience is then, for the refugee in that space. And that, I mean, they did talk about it being welcoming, but she did talk about the, the inequality in those spaces. And so, just makes me wonder what really truly is the experience of the refugee in that space. They certainly are likely feeling some of that. So,
well, also they go to another country. A lot of them had to have host families, like in Turkey or within their country, but someone who would give them refuge before they came to America. And they were very the ones remembering what had happened to them gave credit to those host families who shared such meager belongings. It's reality. It's reality, and we're not aware of it, in the world today.
Yeah, also at the end of the book, she tells like the whole process. So like before refugee can get resettled in America, they have to go through the whole thing with the UNHCR process, and how like it can take 3-4 years, and the vetting process, like they're vetted by every, like the FBI, the CIA, like 9 to 13 different government organizations before they can even get accepted to be a refugee in the United States. And so
we read, oh yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, it's just impossible to lie, because and in one of the stories, the guy talks about that, like how he didn't know what to say, so he was just saying stuff and he couldn't remember what he said. And yeah, but we'll go into each of the stories in detail later on. But what were you going to say, Dr. Garten?
Oh, no, I'll wait.
Okay.
It's going to be hard to get through 14 stories. Okay, I'll be quiet.
No, you're good.
And that's what I was saying. I was going to say something, but when then she said, "Oh, we're going to go through each story," I was like, "Oh no, hold on, I'll wait until we get through a little bit more." Yeah.
So we'll just go through like a few of them. So Irina, she was a Jew from Belarus, and this was the banana story, how she has like just a memory. It's interesting to me what people remember. Like, oh, I remember bananas, and we could only get them once a year. And then as soon as she gets to America, she's like, we got bananas all the time. And how it was just like a sweet memory for her. And but her dad like was an engineer, and then when he comes to America, he's a pizza delivery guy. And just like that, that status change. Not only are you no longer, in your home country, but now your economic status and everything changes. I'm just like that shocked. Like, what are y'all's, like, I don't know, thoughts? How can we, like, I don't know.
And that's such a common experience in so many people. I think that one of the other stories was somebody who ends up, I forget the original job, but they're picking cucumbers just to make ends meet. And
she Irina, she had to change her name too.
Yeah, she did.
So I feel like the loss in so many ways, and the mom was a teacher, Belarus, and then like a nanny maybe, or
like a babysitter.
Yes, babysitter. So just the loss, and I think tying back to, didn't they say at the end of the book, it takes like 3 months, like the refugee settlement agencies don't have enough resources to help with the trauma. And so it takes like 3 months for the refugee to actually even feel that, stress. And so it just, even hearing that, the loss on so many levels, and then support, dealing with that, to deal with that loss. Just imagine, hugely tough.
Yeah, I mean, to only have 3 months of support, and then after that, so you have this caseworker that's been working with you for 3 months, helping you get settled, and then after that, they don't have any more funds to help you. And this is why IRP exists, so we can come in after, the 3 months is over to help continue with getting settled, because you can't uproot your life and totally change and be okay in 3 months. Like
one of the things that I teach in the class is that the immigration policy, the refugee policy here in the United States relies on self-sufficiency. And they mark it in 3 months. Somehow or another, you're supposed to become self-sufficient within 90 days. And I find that to be really callous.
Yeah, I mean, with my job,
we think about like the loss of like an educated workforce, a really highly skilled, educated workforce. And so many, I always think, because I work in health, I think of the number of healthcare professionals that we lose through that 3 months, right? Because one of the things they have to do is try to secure some sort of employment. And what can you get quickly in employment? You can get food service, you can do babysitting, you can do things so that you can check the box so you can continue to receive your benefit. And that's such a stressful thing. And I think dehumanizing in so many ways.
Yeah. I mean, even with my job, I work with people who are living in trauma and have traumatic experiences, and like they know English and are having a trouble getting a job in 3 months, And so imagine like having this other culture, English being a second language, like it's not easy.
Karina, as you go through these stories, if there are places where the refugee felt a little bit of encouragement or dignity, or some little tiny nugget like that, if you know, as you go through, let us know what that is.
Yeah. There are like some really good quotes in the book. So like in the next story, it's about this guy from Somalia, and his refugee story is he was in Somalia and then he like went to Kenya, and then from Kenya they came to America. And one of the quotes that I got from him was, "Life is too fragile to be faced with fear." And so, and just another theme that I see through all of the stories is just stories like of resilience, and how like they don't like let their situation wear them down. Most of them don't. They like try to make the best out of all of it. And I found like I was getting hope from their stories. And then we also see how, because Twin Peaks and Minneapolis have so many refugees, like the refugees are helping each other too a lot. And so, and even even if they were in their home country, like there'd be two different sects and like not get along, like when they're all together in this one city and have gone through the same, like share that trauma, like they're friends here, whereas like in their home country they wouldn't have been able to be friends. They can be friends in America because they're going through the same situation. So there's some stories like that too.
It seems this is not in the book, but for those of us who watch a little bit of the Olympics, of course, Suni Lee, who is Hmong, one of the gymnasts, and experienced great success. And that was such a heartwarming thing to watch the viewing party back in Minneapolis of the Hmong community, who were so enthusiastic and lifted up by her amazing success. But that was sort of an example of pride that they came together and expressed towards her and her remarkable achievement.
Yeah, I thought about her a lot when they were talking about different Hmong stories in the book.
Mm-hmm.
Too. I was like, I wonder if they know Suni.
I know. I think she's kind of a rock star.
Yeah.
Now, I wanted to just follow up a minute on what you were talking about, and Meredith, about the 90 days of refugee support, because a lot of the agencies, even though that's the amount of money they get from the State Department, many of them have other funding, so they try to extend the support. But I feel like that's our group, ALIRP, now is going to have a really nice opportunity to partner with Inspiritus, the Lutheran-based refugee resettlement agency coming to Birmingham. And even if their caseworkers can't really work beyond the 90 days, I think that's the opportunity for volunteers to just partner. And I heard a interview on NPR this week with the director of the International Rescue Committee, which is one of the 9 umbrella refugee resettlement groups. And he was saying, in answer to the question about what can communities do to welcome Afghan refugees, and it was be a friend, you know, have a 9-year-old child partner with a 9-year-old American child partner with a 9-year-old Afghani child, or, and even if they don't speak the language, you know, that's the developing those friendships and being there for people. So I think the model of having volunteer support teams is really something that could make a difference, both for the refugee and asylum. But it's interesting, there wasn't a lot in the book describing those interactions so much with Americans who had been helpful.
I noticed that as well, and had thought about that. I had kind of wondered, like, even when they would talk maybe about siblings going to school or their children going to school, you know, I wondered a little bit more about that context and how that went after get assigned into your grades. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's like a statistic that a lot of like foreigners, when they come to America, they never are invited into an American home. Like it's like 90% or something crazy. And for those of you who've been overseas, I'm sure like we know, like we've been a recipient of such hospitality, whether you've been to like Latin America or the Middle East or Southeast Asia, like it's just so, like America has a lot to learn on how to be hospitable, I feel like.
Maybe that Southern hospitality will be an advantage after all.
Yes, once we get to the Afghan families, yeah.
Karina, did you find in the different stories, did you find that they encountered much violence and trauma? And the reason I asked that question, we have a wonderful new volunteer on your direct support committee who is studying at the School of Social Work in at Alabama, the PTSD in immigrants.
Yeah, I mean, you can, a lot of them wouldn't go straight out and say, hey, I'm struggling with PTSD, but you can see, I mean, how can they not, you know, one of the guys experiences, I think one of the most moving stories for me is this family. He's from Laos and he's trying to get across the river to go to Thailand. And there's these 2 girls are like, sir, can you please help me get across the river with you? I'll give you what's left of my rice. And he's like, I will come back and get you. But as he and his family are crossing the river on the raft, the soldiers come, and we're going to assume that these girls pass away, and how he till this, like decades later, he still thinks about these girls and how he wished he could have saved them. And so, yes, there is, you know, PTSD with that. And I mean, when family sees, like, there's bombings and so yes, they do. And there's one story about a mom who is getting mental health help as she's like a grandmother. So yeah, you can definitely see stories of trauma throughout. Most of them will talk about trauma that they experienced, but I don't think none of the stories is like, hi, I have PTSD. So, but yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
That one story about the woman who couldn't get off the sofa, you know, and she was talking about how much effort she used to make to always cook the traditional foods and keep order in their house. And she really was deeply depressed, it seemed. and unable. And that story you're talking about, the river, I mean, that man had 5 children. I mean, it was sort of like this flimsy raft. He was placed in the most impossible situation. It wasn't as if he could have easily included them, but still the guilt and the despair he seemed to still feel lingered with him.
And I wondered, I can't think of the story right now, but one of the characters is an only child, and her mother had been pregnant during the period and lost some of the babies during that process because of the trauma and because of malnourishment. And I thought, when I heard that, because that's an area that I study, so I'm sort of acutely aware of some of the risks that befall on folks and the outcomes. But when I heard it told from the perspective of a child witnessing those events, it really kind of hit me a little bit more in the core of my being than I anticipated. And I assume there's probably some trauma and mental health that would follow that, right?
Right.
We just.
Well, I want to see a whole different focus on that. I see the incredible, indomitable spirit of people to survive.
Yeah.
I mean, the family that went into the bush and, they gave their children every crumb. They scraped the cassava root, and the parents only ate the burned part because the burned part was too hard for the children to eat. So they gave the children everything for them to survive. And they could see the mother was there, and they touched, and she said, no, that was like, mother, where's your breast? It was gone because she had so thin. And but the incredible spirit to survive and to protect those children and to carry them forth. And then they were able to go and leave the bush, but for an entire year to have lived it. And they were from a very upper class, very wealthy family, so everything that they had to do was nothing that they would have ever thought of. And yet they were able to do it. And that's because of that amazing spirit. And that's what we have to hook into, and we have to focus on, that every single individual has that deep inside. We may not.
Oh no, we lost you. Did we lose Donna?
Yeah, your voice just went out, Donna. I don't know if you're lost.
Sorry, Linda. Yeah. But I agree, Donna. I think that's a really great point. There was something else that I had thought about that I heard in a couple of different stories that I just thought, gosh, the desire to be together and the desire to survive through the problem was how much technology played a role in some of these stories, like the ability to get on the internet and the YouTube and like some escapism there. And then I think, again, I can't remember the family, but where the mother had a couple of kids after they had started their paperwork process. And so they couldn't bring their youngest with them. And they would get on the phone and the internet and they would talk to continue to do that paperwork. And I just thought, gosh, that is tough. Like, those of us who work with these populations know how difficult that paperwork is. And then to do it remotely through, the telephone and the process, and yet that resiliency, that desire to, survive, get through, move to another place, or even hopeful. Some of them even mentioned how they had hoped that they could go back home. And I think like that ability to keep looking forward and to keep planning ahead is just really, really astounding.
It goes back to like the theme of being resilient and choosing to be resilient. Sorry, I took notes on the book, so let me. Okay, there was another story about that took place in Darfur about he was in college, and she was she was a refugee, and then she went back, and
Yeah.
and okay, so she was from Bosnia, but she went to Darfur, and because she wanted to hit other refugees. And at this point, like a missile hit one of the apartments, and how they were like, okay, well, how are we gonna live? Well, we'll just put up tarps and stay away from the windows. And but how she like went back, and even though she was from Bosnia, when she was talking with like the chief in Darfur, they're like, how do you get us? Because they're like, what does this white girl with blonde hair know any of our troubles? And then she was like, I'm actually a refugee too. And the chief was saying that every refugee feels for another. And it like it, and they had that share Muslim faith that helped them help them feel for each other and stuff. So yeah, her name was Myra, and that was the guy who his father joined the army to save his Catholic friend. That was that story.
Yeah.
And then another story talked about, it took place in Liberia, and how she went to go get diapers and then was harassed by the police, and she thought she was gonna die. And the rebels ended up taking their house, and then they went and survived in the bush. It was that story. And then her husband got malaria, and she went to go find a doctor, and had two other guys help her carry her husband to the doctor, and the doctor was able to save his life just because she kept fighting for him. Like, you will mush up this medicine, and I will pry his mouth open for you to get, and a quote that that really hit me was, she said, people are still good, and that's why faith matters. Just like at the end of the day, like we want to believe that people are still good. And then there was a story about this guy
Karina, I remember in that, what hurt me is that it just, that doctor had worked for Firestone or some capitalistic corporation, and they just kept the people poor. It was like working on a plantation. There was a company doctor, a company place to buy your food, but that was when things were good, and then things got bad because the company left, and then things really got bad. But she did find that the doctor had stayed behind and was helping people, and when her husband was, after he had been treated, out on the path or in the bush or something like that, she said, "Oh, thank you, Dr. John. Bless you, Dr. John. Bless you, Dr. John." So let you know that desperation and faith, run through this book.
Yes.
Karina, can I ask some of the students that are here a question?
Yeah.
Even though I know you guys haven't read this book, you have read When the Stars Are Scattered, which is a refugee story, and also the story of migrant farm workers as told by Seth Holmes, which is an ethnography. And I was just wondering, like, as you're hearing some of this conversation, is any of it really connecting with you with some of the stories that we've been reading in our class?
Yeah, I think so. When you talked about the Firestone or the tire company, that really resonated with the book about migrant farm workers to me, because that's sort of the same thing. Like they live where they work, and like their housing is provided to them by the farm, and they don't really go out to see a doctor. Doctors kind of come there to help them. So that was kind of interesting.
Yeah,
and
go ahead.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
You go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
One of the things that I noticed was refugees, where they're supporting each other in their community when they got here. It might not have been in the books, but in a lot of the the coursework we've done and the videos, it was how their community, even though they had differences in their home country, those probably went away while they got here or after they got here to the US and resettled, and how they supported each other. That and a lot of the health disparities with the PTSD and other traumas, those are also reflected somewhat in this book, from what I understand so far.
Rebecca, were you going to say something? Thanks, Chris.
Yeah, I was just gonna add on, like just the fact of there's not a lot of upward mobility, you know, so the availability to, you know, move out of that space, you know, that they find themselves in, as far as in that poverty space that you were referring to earlier, like, you know, with the migrant farm workers there, it's like once they're in that status, there's not really a way to move out of that well. And so it kind of, or it's very, very difficult. So, you know, just seeing how, you know, kind of keeping people in their pathway and not allowing and giving opportunity to move out.
I think Rebecca speaks a lot in the book, you know, she's talking about the books, the structural violence in there of where they're kind of stuck where they're at, and there's no way for them to, even if they wanted to try to move up or do something different, there's nothing they can do. The system has been built. So even if they want to achieve or do something, it's just, there's so much stacked against them. And apart from the books, what kind of struck me, kind of the first part of the discussion when they were talking about the story of the girl in Bosnia. Actually, I have a good friend's wife who immigrated from Bosnia, and she had told me a story once. Her and her little brother, they grew up in Bosnia, and at one point she said you had the choice between starving or potentially being shot, because they would do the airdrops into where they lived, which was sometimes a war zone, and a lot of times they would kind of camp out outside there, and they would shoot people who would try to approach the aid drops to get food or those type of things. So she kind of told the story of sometimes you had to decide, you know, if it was worth it to risk your life that day to try to get something to eat, or you would starve. Which, you know, and at the time, I want to say she said she was around 12 years old and her brother was 8. And that was a choice that she was faced with every day. And she was lucky enough that she was able to, like she told me, like she worked really hard to stay very healthy and to learn English so that they were able to emigrate. I believe she was around 18 to Chicago. And she was able to bring her brother with her, but she was always scared to get sick, because if you got sick, then they would not accept you to come over here. But it was just kind of, you know, obviously as an adult, she's telling me this story, but just to be at 12 to decide, okay, I'm going to risk my life, maybe a shot to go to possibly get some food today, is just an unimaginable type of decision. So I think, you know, it's just very difficult to see that through the eyes of the child that's going through that, even if they're telling it as an adult years later.
Yeah. If I could add one thing, from listening to the story about staying in the work environment where they had the company store and you only got paid with the company money, that goes back to in America just in the 20th century with coal miners. That's something we've suffered through already.
Yeah, there's we're getting close on time, and there's still like so many more stories. But one of the another quote that I just want to share before we get to other discussion questions is this person from Eritrea mentions that life is too short for just the bad to happen, even a hard life. So even if you have a hard life, there's still good in it. And that that is like their nuggets of hope, is just looking for the good in the hard. So to wrap it up, one last question. How do you think, there's lots of challenges that were discussed in this book, and that refugees face, especially once they come to America. So how might you, or how do you think ALIRP could help respond to some of these challenges?
Well, I've one of the things that I really believe so much in is just the people to people connections, like I mentioned before, and the volunteer support and finding ways. And a challenge we've had at ALIRP is that many of the families we're serving are Spanish speaking. And so it's been a challenge to find, make volunteers who could speak the language. But after listening to this director of the International Rescue Committee, that may be less important. It may be just to make the connection and be there for people in whatever way. And a challenge I think that we have, because we're hearing in Minneapolis, it appears as you're talking that so many people could help one another. They were living in communities close together. And here, the families we're helping are often quite dispersed. They might be in Montevallo and Alabaster and Bessemer and Titusville, and there isn't one like a center. Some communities have, a center where people come and do cooking classes or auto mechanic classes and things like that. It may be that this is something we should try to look at and cultivate in Birmingham as the Inspiritus comes, and there might be some more opportunity to facilitate those kinds of mutual support networks.
Yeah, getting like affordable housing all in one area.
All that is absolutely primary, but it occurs to me from what I'm hearing, just having the children be introduced to other children who are already here. Children manage to get along regardless of differences. And it really might be, there's some
of the time they do.
Yeah.
Little children will do that. Now look, Alfred, I know they pick on you.
I was just going to say, hi,
Alfred. He's come along.
I wonder if what we did with the Russians who came over 27 years ago, we paired them. We were friendship families. Mm-hmm. And I'm still so very close to my friendship family. Part of them have died in the years during the time they've been here, but the ones that are left here are still very close and like to come for holidays or, to be invited for holidays. And I wonder if we could get volunteers as a family who would take a family and invite them to their home. And of course, I know we've got to get beyond COVID to be able to do some of this, but I think the visiting, someone mentioned that we're not hospitable, but that's the way to get at that problem, is for them to know an American family.
I think that's a great idea. That's something we should really look at.
I agree. And building on what you said too, what you can do as a friend is build connections to the point where they trust you. And then you can both support their resilience and listen to their story and walk along as a witness to their story, however they tell it. Mm-hmm. That's where healing starts.
Absolutely.
And just sharing some of the things they like. The Russians particularly appreciated the symphony and the opera. And I had a call from one of them today and said, "Oh, Barbara, the Metropolitan Opera is playing at one of the movie houses, and I want you to come go with me," because she was so excited about it. But these are things that we could do that they enjoy.
Yeah.
Well, and I think too, on the other side, it's like sharing these stories that we learn through like what reading we do and through our own, just desire to understand circumstances with our networks too.
Yeah.
Like I really am so happy to see all these students here, even though they didn't read the book, because sometimes you might not have come. You might not have been like, well, I didn't get a chance to read the book, so I'm not going to come. And then you miss out on a conversation that I hope everybody got something out of, you know? And so often I feel like as Americans, we think that we're not a part of the group. And so we don't participate with the group. And I think that, you know, we can see that maybe we have a shared humanity, we have a shared experience in some way or another that, you know, we can also share with our own friends and say, you know, I just learned this thing and I had no idea. I had no idea that Minnesota was like the largest resettlement state in this United States. I mean, that's a pretty interesting fact that we can all walk away with and then know that and then pay attention to that when we see it. But I do agree, like all the research that I've seen and the experiences I've had is that if we can bring that community together somehow into the fold, that there is so much social support that comes from that. And I'm a big fan of breaking bread with folks. So I am a huge, like, you bring a dish that you like, or let's go shopping together and get food and find a place. Like that's one that a lot of my friends have done too, is like, let's go find a store that has some of the food that you like and teach me how to make something that you do.
Mm-hmm.
So
hey, this is an idea. This is an idea that I know everybody wants to invite people to their homes, but because we live in so distant places and they live distantly, maybe we could meet and break bread at parks like East Lake or Ruffner or Oak Mountain or Railroad Park, and kind of do it on a regular basis and say, okay, this month we're going to meet at this park. This month we're going to meet at, or, you know, might be an idea. And then out of that could come friendships that the friendship families might come from that. I don't know. Long ago when I helped some Vietnamese who were, they were ethnic Chinese, but they were kicked out, or they found a way out of Vietnam. And I helped them, and they loved going places that were nearby that they didn't know where they were. You know what I mean? We went to Montgomery one time, you know.
Well, you've been doing some of that beautifully with some of the families. You've been language partners. I know you've been meeting at the parks, and that's a great idea. Yeah, that's because especially with COVID, that has been a limitation. So meeting outside has been something that could happen.
At least until it turns cold, we can. It's an outdoor open house.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you can encourage each one of these groups. The Hispanic groups have different food choices, and they could sponsor it one week, and any of our other groups that have cultural differences in their food could provide the food for the next meeting. And that would bring those groups themselves together and develop some closeness between them.
Mm-hmm. Or because winter's coming, you know, maybe we could meet in a gym we could find a friendly congregational gym to meet in.
Good thought.
I really just want to also take a minute to thank Karina for leading us and keeping us a large group on track. So thank you so much, Karina.
You're welcome. Thanks for joining. I really enjoyed the discussion. Like, I'm an avid reader, so I love being able to talk to other people about books that I'm reading. So yeah, thank you for reading the book. And if you haven't read it, I hope this has sparked you to read it. Maybe over winter break when you don't have school. So.
And I don't think proselytizing is such a bad word. I was at the dermatologist yesterday holding a book called Little Bee. I don't know if you heard of that. It's a really good book. Starts out, it's a Nigerian lady in a UK detainee camp. And she goes, what are you reading? And then she said, oh, well, I'm donating to Miles for Migrants. Have you heard of that? But anyway, she's gave 25,000 miles. So that airlines are doubling it. She said it was, but anyway, it opened up a conversation about what we can do to help migrants. So you never know what you're reading, like somebody else said, will help. Conversation starter.
Yeah. Yeah. In fact, I was remembering, Jane, one of your interests for your internship was a project about how to encourage conversation when people might have different views about immigration, and maybe this idea of getting people to share a book, you know, understanding from the perspective of another person, I think might be one strategy. Karina, I want to echo Meredith and say thank you so much for this. I think it looks like our hour is about up. Do you want to have any kind of final conclusions or quotes, the favorite quotes, anything you'd like to share before we sign off?
No, I just really appreciate everyone contributing to the conversation. And if you haven't read it, read it. And hopefully in next year in 2022, we'll have another book club.
Awesome.
TBD. So
great.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, everybody. And we've recorded this, so we will be putting this up on our YouTube channel for those who weren't able to participate tonight.
Awesome.
Thanks to everybody. Have a good evening.
Great idea to have recorded it.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.